down the walls. We're breaking free. Yeah, we're breaking free. No oppression is out for liberty. Breaking free. Yeah, we're taking a stand. Freedom's in our hearts. We're reclaiming our land. They try to silence us, but we won't be tamed. Voices getting louder, can't keep us in chains. We got the power, we got the might. Together we can shine, together we can fight. Feel the rhythm in your feet, it's time to stand tall. Raise your voice and shout, we're breaking down the walls. We're breaking free, yeah, we're breaking free. No oppression is out for liberty, breaking free. Yeah, we're taking a stand. Freedom's in our hearts, we're reclaiming our land. They try to silence us, but we won't be tamed. Voices getting louder, can't keep us in chains. We got the power, we got the might. Together we can shine, together we can fight. Feel the rhythm in your feet, it's time to stand tall. Raise your voice and shout, we're breaking down the walls. We're breaking free, yeah, we're breaking free. No oppression is out for liberty, breaking free. Yeah, we're taking a stand. Freedom's in our hearts, we're reclaiming our land. We're claiming our land.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Right.
I went close. Maybe I should go back. Yeah, let's do that. Oh, Terry found out that I changed her description on her profile. Darn it. Did you see that, Mike? It said under her name for 3 episodes, it said live streaming to the villages.
Live streaming to the villages, yes.
That's where Terry
what she
goes on
does.
the prowl.
Right. On the
Wow.
prowl, right.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, like that, huh? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
I don't have the sound effects things.
No.
I gotta just make
No.
Yeah.
noises.
Yeah,
Not
because
on
the
the
person in
prowl.
charge of the
That's
sound
okay.
effects would have,
Yeah.
be the subject of that joke.
Yeah. Everybody knows the story about the golf cart and the loofah, so I can just skip all that. So, yeah.
It's legendary now, yes.
Yes, I do need to update my pardon slide. And
Yeah.
my video guy and I've been working on that for roughly, I don't know, it's about the same amount of time that Ross was in jail, I think, is about how long we've been working
How
on
long-
getting the intro to this. So, it doesn't like the 3 cam and doesn't like autocorrect. All sorts of problems. Nothing's going right. Nothing's going right. It's another Thursday. Nothing's going right. How are you, Mike?
I am fantastic. How are you guys?
Doing good. Terry, how are you? No, she's just going to type. She's not talking to me. I'm getting the silent
good.
treatment.
Oh,
The claws are out.
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. So welcome everybody. And I've got the last week's slide in here. This is what we did the last couple. We did the rules for new radicals. So this is the slide for tonight. And hey, Cassandra, welcome.
1981, 1982 there, yes. Good year.
Yeah. And that was almost when the Sox went to the ALCS and broke my heart.
That's right.
Yeah, 83. So yeah. Oh yeah, I have a YouTube thanks to Terry and to Creole Queen. They got me all set up on there. That was a funny story. I didn't even know that actually worked. And Casey checked it while we were live streaming and had I see an @Terry tell free it works and he should use it. Like, oh, okay. I got the message. There's Chris. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
I do that too, like the Beastie Boys. Yo, Mike D.
And I get respect. Yes. Hi, Mike D. I know.
So, yeah. So this is Township Liberation. We do it every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern. You would know that because you are here. So unless you're watching on the replay. This is Mike, and you can follow him, his personal account, because, you're cool like that with him. You can do his personal account at 2Free Mike, or his Township Liberation account, where he does his spaces from on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. That is at Town Liberation. Had an awesome space. Let's pause for a second.
Really
Talk about
good,
how
yeah.
great that space was, Mike.
That was really good. We had Donnie the Misfit herself join us, but the topic was basically what I'm calling the war on poultry, and it's a global war, and that's kind of what I touch on a lot on the Tuesday Spaces, because it's at noon Pacific time, my time, 3 p.m. your time, free, and it's 8 p.m. UK and Nigeria time, and 9 a.m. the following day New Zealand time. So all my buddies from across, all my Liberty friends from across the world, all get to kind of chime in and talk about their latest struggles and their goals and so forth for improving liberty in their neck of the woods. But the thing that I think is universal is this kind of war on poultry that Donnie's on the front lines of, and it was a great conversation about the El Gallo show, how the city of Yucaipa here in California, about 90 miles or so inland of Huntington Beach, got cold feet about hosting an event because of a ban on poultry shows coming out of Sacramento and Gavin Newsom's desk. And of course, I did get a chance to discuss this. I need to follow up with these guys, but with the Huntington Beach City Council, who, for those of you that don't know, Huntington Beach is the most anti-Sacramento city in California history. And unfortunately, so far, they seem to be standing alone. But I proposed the idea of hosting the El Gallo show in Huntington Beach out of direct defiance to Gavin Newsom and his ridiculous ban on poultry shows out of fear of the bird flu.
I think Mike froze. You talk bad about Gavin Newsom, you get the cold hand of Sacramento on you. Yep, Mike is forever stuck in Gavin Newsom world. So let me just finish up the intros here. I'll put Terry. I'll put you back in the control center here. As everybody knows, Terry runs a show from behind the scenes here, and yeah. Casey said facts. He cut off your internet. Yep. And I'm just going to remove Mike. Whoa, that's me really close. Hello, everybody. And yeah. So welcome, Rose. Oh, I didn't know you were in Illinois. I am a former Chicagoan myself. Oh, Eric's here. Welcome, Eric. Eric was in the other night and in the space the other night. And I couldn't decide what I'm allowed to say. So I'm just going to say, follow Eric because he's my favorite rock star and he's a very talented musician who may or may not be doing some awesome musician stuff, but might not. So yeah, I didn't say anything, Eric, but follow Eric. That's all I'm saying is follow Eric. And Cassandra's in Illinois too. There you go. Eric is the best. Follow Eric, please. I'm not allowed to say anything, or I'd say a lot more cool stuff about Eric. Not allowed to say anything, but may or may not. That's all I can say. And yeah, so let me go back to this. Look at me by my lonely self over there. I know all the buttons. So Mike, who froze, and is he back? Are you back, Mike?
Yeah, man. I'm plugged into the Ethernet, man. It's not supposed to happen, but maybe the
Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, the Sacramento
Gavin
Newsom. Surely on to them, so it's only fair, I guess.
The hand of gruesome Newsom came down and grabbed you.
Yeah, at least he hasn't set my neighborhood on fire.
That's true.
I better be careful about that. That might be next.
Yeah. So Mike's book is Revival of Common Sense, The Case for Township Liberation. For those of you that don't know, that's the inspiration for these. This is our 11th about Township Liberation, but it's way too cheap on Amazon. You can get it for $5 for the Kindle. So please go over and do that. Great book. I have 2 copies.
Yes.
And yeah, in my YouTube, which I
channel
previously mentioned, I didn't know was working, and now is working, and we've been using it for like a couple weeks now. Thanks to everybody that helped with that. And Yeah, some old slides apparently. And then share is an old slide, but it's a still relevant slide. Please share. We're trying to get this out to as many people as possible. We truly believe that this is the path forward to freedom. Yes. Local power. You can do things locally that you can't do at a state level or a federal level. You can do a lot locally. You can organize locally. You can band together with your neighbors, be all on the same team, and work towards freedom. So Terry said first gruesome Newsom shuts off the water.
Yeah, right. Next year, internet's next. I wouldn't put it past it, man.
No, down south of Chicago. Okay. We played some ball down there back in the day.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Cash and I are doing Race, Faith, and Freedom on Wednesdays. Yes. And we got the game shows. Tomorrow we're doing You Aren't a Real Libertarian. If you haven't seen it, it's the funniest game show at 8 p.m. Eastern on Fridays on my feed. So,
yes.
It will teach you all about libertarianism in an entertaining and fun way. And the unique twist is it's decentralized game showing, which means the audience picks the scores and basically destroys the contestants' scores. Mike is the all-time leader at negative 19,000 or something right now.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
So, it's great. Eric, it's great to have you, man. Glad you could attend.
Yes. Yes, I did. I am the exact the X Spaces, complete improvisation. You never know what you're going to get.
Don't you have a theory that Zappa would have been a good presidential candidate for the Libertarians?
It's not a theory. I would write a paper on it. Absolutely, he would have been a fantastic president. He left us way too early. He left us 3 years younger than I am today. That's really tragic. A brilliant musician and brilliant socio-political thinker. Just next level, and definitely liberty-minded, if not anarchist.
He was 65 when he passed?
Right? I know, right? It feels that way. No, if only 52. Can you believe that?
So Terry, follow Terry. She's our producer. She's
please follow Terry.
T76 at Bats T76. Waz has subscriptions according to Waz. And like I said, please share this out. So ready to get going here, though. So thanks for everybody for joining. Please share out if you have not shared out. Please say hi in the chat if you are live in the chat. So what we want to talk about tonight is the foundations of a free community. And basically, a free community is one that operates independently of centralized control, like a federal government, relies on voluntary cooperation, private property rights, self-governance, and market-based solutions to provide services and to resolve disputes. So such communities prize your personal freedom, economic autonomy, and decentralization, rejecting the coercive state intervention that holds us all back. So examples of these types of solutions are a voluntary governance model. So communities implementing private arbitration and conflict resolution instead of relying on state government courts. Self-sustaining local economies, encouraging independent businesses and local production to reduce reliance on global corporations and supply chains. And then decentralized security and defense, utilizing private security firms, community watches, local militias to maintain the peace without government policing. So I like to throw some stats in here. In 2021, 68% of Americans believed that the federal government had too much power. Small businesses employ almost half of the U.S. private workforce, which shows us the importance of local entrepreneurship and economic independence.
Can I say something about that statistic? That's staggering when you think about how much legislation undermines small business, like on the books. Right, that's in spite of a completely captive federal government that favors big, as I like to say, big for the big, favors big business, favors the larger competitors, and even writes legislation to their benefit. So that's happening in spite of that. Can you imagine what it would look like if there was truly a free market, in the sense that all those regulations that support the dominant market players was lifted, and entrepreneurs could thrive, and small businesses could thrive unobstructed and unimpeded from getting into the marketplace. Can you imagine how much more that number would be? And in fact, private contractors, right? The gig economy would absolutely explode. So that's an amazing statistic, given how difficult it is to be a small business in the United States.
Absolutely. So community policing. Community policing programs have reduced crime rates up to 30% compared to centralized law enforcement. And then we talk about mutual aid groups. Mutual aid groups have surged by over 1,000% during the COVID pandemic, proving communities can support themselves without government intervention. And then over 70% of arbitration cases in the US result in faster resolution than traditional court cases, highlighting the efficiency of private dispute resolution over the state courts. So want to talk about some beneficial actions that can occur to, put this goal forward. So establish private arbitration systems, replace government courts with voluntary dispute resolution methods, encourage local trade and entrepreneurship, create local marketplaces, co-ops, and bartering networks to strengthen your economy and your local resilience. Develop community defense networks, form decentralized security teams to ensure safety without relying on state police forces, educate residents on voluntarism, promote knowledge on property rights, self-ownership, and market-based governance, create mutual aid networks, provide charity and emergency support, which is so important here in Florida, without government assistance or welfare, and adopt local currencies or crypto, reduce the dependency on state-controlled fiat money by fostering parallel economies, which we were talking about in Spaces the other day as well.
Yes, we were.
And so which of those jump out at you, Mike?
Well, there's a couple. The one that I think is going to be really crucial, particularly as I learn more about the situation with our friends in the United Kingdom, who will probably be watching this on replay because it's, 3 a.m. there. But particularly in the United Kingdom, and even probably more so, my friends in Nigeria, it would be a highly decentralized police force. A police force that's truly accountable only to the township that they serve. That to me is probably the most important thing. The one reason why the current Labour government in the United Kingdom was able to impose Orwellian dystopia in a very short period of time when it comes to speech. In a very, very short time, people were getting arrested for their social media posts. Meanwhile, knife gangs and rape gangs are running rampant throughout the UK. So priorities, right? Keir Stalin. The fact that they're able to implement that is because the policing is very centralized. I would, for the United Kingdom in particular, I would love to see that reversed. So that's really near, because if you think about it, we kind of need to if we're going to rein in any part of government, the more I think about it, this actually kind of takes the place of somewhat, maybe equal importance to the currency, to centralized banking. Is decentralizing not only banking, but decentralizing probably even more so that I think about it because of the brute force and coercion of government involved. I'm thinking decentralizing law enforcement may even be a higher priority to me than decentralized banking and currency. That's a tough one, but I'm looking at it going, the coercion comes from a centralized police force. The more centralized the police force, the more your government can thug you into obedience. So I think that's where the brute force really is. If nothing else, I think that's got to be the top priority. But barter systems, co-op farming, all that other kind of stuff, that's also deeply important. And obviously, a decentralized banking, any way you could possibly get away from fiat currency, hugely important to liberating your township. But I'm starting to look at law enforcement, and the decentralization of law enforcement is absolutely critical, because that's where the enforcers do the enforcing against the governed. So I think that's my top pick of that nice long list.
You better hope for decentralized policing if you're going to go after Newsom and Keir Stalin in the same conversation. So,
yes,
and
the Nigerian government too. They're horrible to their citizens. Worse than way worse than Keir Stalin.
Casey's not live in the chat because got picked up by a van offering to end
the Fed. Right. So offering to end the Fed. Ending the Fed would be massive to this end. Okay, so why
that'd be worth him getting abducted for.
Well, maybe. I think Casey's more important on the battlefield, so I don't know. But the thing about it, if you end the Fed, you kind of end the means to centralize the police force a little bit, right? Like everything sort of has to decentralize if you decentralize banking. But again, as far as top priority, whatever gets the law enforcement out of the centralized mix, I would much rather recruit the good. People talk about, are there any good cops? All my agorist friends say no, but I would say that there probably are if you just recruit them and say, like, we'll cover, like, whatever they're paying you, we'll pay you something comparable. Work for us instead. We, the governed, work for us locally. Be accountable to us locally. And if we pool our resources by not paying into the centralized system, that is paying our taxes and so forth into the centralized system. Yes, I'm talking about tax revolts. I don't see any reason why we couldn't win some people over by showing proof of concept, good law enforcement people, or raise up some folks with the right kind of training to be that decentralized law enforcement for your area, so that they defend your individual liberty, as is that's the idea of having law enforcement, having defenders of individual liberty rather than oppressors of individual liberty, which unfortunately is what we see today, and certainly see it in the UK and Nigeria.
Chris makes a good point here. Eric rage debates as good as anyone. Yeah, Eric is definitely one of the many people in this movement smarter than me. So if you see him, he has great spaces as well.
Yeah,
good time on there. All right, so 6 mistakes communities should avoid: over-reliance on a single leader. Freedom must be community-driven, not just based on one person or even one organization's vision. Neglecting security and conflict resolution. Without clear mechanisms for this, disputes can lead to instability. Failing to build economic self-sufficiency. Dependence on outside resources weakens autonomy, and you want that self-sufficiency. Yeah. Ignoring the role of culture and education. Without a shared understanding of freedom, future generations will continue to gravitate towards statism. Underestimating government resistance, we're their bread and butter. Authorities often target independent communities that are bucking the system, so preparation for that is crucial. And finally, ignoring legal and financial frameworks. Without clear contracts and economic structures, free communities can collapse. Which of those jumps out at you as mistakes to avoid, Mike?
Well, the smart contracts come to mind. I'm really intrigued by the potential impact of a society built on a legal framework of smart contracts. A truly contractual society is a voluntary society. It's kind of, again, very libertarian in thinking. It's very Rothbardian, and I think that's where we're going to see the evolution of a liberation for individual townships, as we conceivably, as our friend Mark in New Zealand is pushing towards, we create trusts to replace local governing bodies that are particularly the ones that are not doing what Huntington Beach is doing. Well, that's fine. We just redirect our property taxes to a trust. That can all be done through smart contracts, so that each individual household, each individual citizen has a say, so to speak, in how those funds are used in a local area. But it replaces so much of the unnecessary political bureaucracy at the local level that I really see smart contracts as kind of facilitating all the other things you meant, or facilitating and protecting against all the other pitfalls that you mentioned. I think it's a good place to start, and maybe that's why you mentioned it last, because I think that's probably the most promising starting point.
Yeah, for those of you unaware of smart contracts, Smart contracts are a piece of technology that basically operate outside of the centralized justice system. So they're executed via technology. There's protocols in them that can automatically execute according to certain actions. And the agreement can be had between two parties without any outside influence or necessity for a court, for example. So yeah, smart contracts on the blockchain, I think, are the future for sure.
Yes, and can facilitate all the other things that we need to guard against on that list that you mentioned.
Exactly. All right, so the next one on my list is self-governance and decentralization. So self-governance refers to a community's ability to manage its own affairs without external control, making decisions through local institutions and locally agreed upon processes. Decentralization involves distributing authority from centralized governments to local entities, empowering communities to address their unique needs and their preferences. So some examples of application of this are local decision-making. So municipalities handling education policies tailored to their communities, cultural and economic contexts. Participatory budgeting, residents directly deciding on the allocation of a portion of the municipal budget, ensuring funds address local priorities. And then community-led resource management, local groups managing their natural resources such as forests or fisheries to promote sustainability and conservation. And so some important stats about this: in countries with decentralized governance, local governments often manage over 20% of public expenditures, enhancing service delivery efficiency. Participatory budgeting has been implemented in over 1,500 municipalities worldwide, increasing transparency and citizen engagement. Studies show that decentralization can lead to a 10% increase in public service satisfaction among citizens. Regions with autonomous governance structures often experience higher economic growth rates compared to centrally governed areas. And decentralized countries tend to have lower levels of corruption because local governments are more accountable to their constituents.
Right. Yes.
So some benefits to the communities are establishing local councils, form representative bodies to make decisions that reflect the community's interests, promote civic engagement, encourage residents to participate in public meetings and decision-making processes, develop transparent processes, implement clear procedures for decision-making and resource allocation, invest in local leadership training, equip community members with the skills necessary to effectively manage local governance, foster partnerships, collaborate with neighboring communities to share resources and best practices, and then implement feedback mechanisms. Create channels for residents to voice concerns or suggestions. What jumps out there, Mike?
Feedback channels, and sort of in real time, are kind of, what stands out to me about that, of course, is it reminds me of the software mechanism that our friend Mark from New Zealand is putting together for his local constituencies and his municipalities to become more accountable, because like many places, the level of abuse is just outstanding. The padding of contracts that should be 1/3 or 1/4 of the actual amount spent to get this infrastructure need met, things of that nature. I think that's what really stands out to me, because I think that's going to be the method by which we hold our local municipalities accountable from put it in U.S. terms, from your city government or your citywide governing body or school board on up to maybe no more larger than the county level or parish, depending on what part of the United States you're in. That's a great way to sort of force transparency, because most of these entities, I think in the United States, are not used to that level of scrutiny by the governed. And yet that's exactly what we need to be doing. We need to be shining a light into that darkness. And again, Orange County, California absolutely needs this. One of the board members was essentially shamed into resignation because of the charges of corruption and so forth that were levied against him. So there's only 4 out of 5 board members even active in Orange County, California. This is an example. And that's just, I think, scratching the surface. But that's the type of thing we need to shine a light on because of 2 reasons. One, it's just the right thing to do because their governing shouldn't even exist apart from our consent as the governed. But also, it can point people in the direction. It's sort of a way to determine whether we should be going in the direction of completely circumventing these jerks altogether and creating some of the other things you described in that list. Your own council, or trust, or somebody to facilitate the infrastructure needs of your, as large as a county down to a city or school district size. So I think that's the beginning, though. It starts with that kind of accountability that comes from shining a light on the way our money, our tax dollars, our extorted money is abused, and holding these people accountable.
Absolutely. Eric adds, life naturally organizes itself in hierarchies. One of the benefits of decentralization or modulation within that framework, you can't take down the entire system by eliminating one part of it.
Interesting. That's a very Zappa-esque observation. I would expect that from Eric.
Zach says very agorist of you. Yeah.
True.
Welcome, Zach. And Zach adds smart contracts and DAOs change this.
Really
DAOs are decentralized autonomous organization. So things like smart contracts organized on the blockchain. And Zach is an expert in this stuff, where Mike and I are not. So Zach,
I'm glad he's here.
A couple really nice streams about this weekly. If you put it in the chat, Zach, I'll throw it up so people know when you're streaming about those.
Streaming and screaming.
Terry says, agorists unite on Township Liberation. Who would have thought?
That's right. Well, I don't know how many agorists are on board. I just because I happen to call myself one doesn't mean other agorists are necessarily down with what I'm suggesting. I kind of hope so. I kind of think agorism right now is a very patriotic thing to practice.
Casey says, trusts in today's words are a hack to protect against government overreach.
Yes, they are, Casey. Absolutely. I'm blown away. And their trusts exist all throughout common law countries. So we can really have our decentralized network of liberated townships all unified by, in many cases, probably necessary, unless you're living in Huntington Beach, like, you may need to have a trust administer your local infrastructure needs. But can you imagine a giant network of communities, townships across the world that are functioning in that fashion? I mean, it's kind of its own nation state at that point if we're all interconnected, we're all trading amongst each other.
And Zach says he's really not an expert, but I've learned a ton from him. So he's got more expertise than me.
I know.
We'll settle on that, Zach.
Yeah. On a sliding scale, Zach, you're way ahead of us.
Yep. And all right. So 6 mistakes to avoid: centralizing authority. So going back to consolidating power within a small group undermines broader participation.
Yes.
Neglecting minority voices, failing to include everyone, including a diverse perspective in decision-making processes. Lack of accountability, not establishing mechanisms to hold leaders responsible for their actions. Overlooking capacity building, ignoring the need for training and developing in governance skills. Insufficient communication, failing to keep the community informed about decisions and policies. Which of those, Mike, do you think are is a mistake that you want to highlight avoiding?
The number one, which is the one thing that we've just like the frog in the proverbial boiling water, the one thing that we have done in the United States, which was supposed to be the antithesis of this, is centralized power. I want to riff on this for a minute because obviously that's the number one. human problem. That's the number one problem of human civilization: centralizing power, allowing power to be centralized. What makes the United States such a tragedy as far as how things have devolved towards centralized power is how complicit the population has been, how deceived in one sense or another, and then how complicit in other senses. Some of even the people that I even generally revere in American history, like President Calvin Coolidge, went along for the centralization ride on a couple too many things, not the least of which was and we brought this up online a couple of times, the reauthorization of the Federal Reserve Act and the reauthorization of the Federal Reserve's existence, which he on principle opposed, but went along with because that's just what you do in a political society. He also wasn't a big fan of alcohol prohibition, but because it was part of the Constitution, he enforced it. So there are some glaring mistakes building up over time in the United States that led us to this position of having a highly centralized power. Now, keep in mind, the New World was meant to represent the true New World Order. The Old World Order, which they're now calling the New World Order, is an order of highly centralized power, of old school totalitarian monarchies, or dystopias by any other name. Those that are trying, these empires that are trying to emulate, that emerged out of the Roman Empire, trying to emulate the Roman Empire, the world's first great global dystopia. That's the old world order, where the individual was at the absolute bottom of that list. Even households were then just right below. Well, the founding fathers of the United States, although not comprehensively enough, but they certainly wanted to reverse that order. They wanted the true New World Order, which put the individual and the household at the top, which put the governed at the top of that order. It was the inversion of centralized power. It was decentralized power. And that we have lost. I mean, that has been obviously tragically lost. And we're trying to get it back. I think there's a glimmer. It's obviously more than even a glimmer of hope right now in the sort of landscape of the United States right now. It's kind of in the ether, but across the world. I mean, again, I don't want to be too optimistic, but it seems like people are realizing we need to get back to that. We need to get back on track to the true New World Order, which was individuals and their households at the top of the governing chain, at the top of society, rather than the other way around, which is what they're calling the New World Order. It's what the people say, the globalists. I say dystopians. I prefer that term because it's less benign, in my opinion. But either way, it's the people who want top-down, centralized power. Those are the ones that are actually bringing the old world order back, and unfortunately, all too successfully in the last several decades.
Eric adds, our brain is representative of decentralization. We have a left and a right hemisphere that specializes in very specific tasks. And if you have damage in any part of the brain, it can usually adapt to that change and still maintain itself. So that basically proves that Eric's smarter than me.
Right? Well, not only that, Eric, you probably heard, I mean, my first Rush record that I ever heard was Hemispheres. And it goes back to Greek philosophy. That's so on point. It's like people need to really digest that sentence you just wrote, because it's absolutely true. The hemispheres of the brain are indicative of why we have to have a balance to everything, right? There needs to be, but just for our brains to function and be able to perform the duties they're supposed to function, so we can exist in this existence, is to have a decentralized. It has to function in a decentralized fashion. If our brain was too centralized in any way, shape, or form, that's when cataclysm happens. In your brain, not just organically, but philosophically as well.
That's my favorite Rush Limbaugh album.
Rush Limbaugh, he says.
So Zach says World Block Roundtable every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern on Dragon Chain on X at Dragon Chain, and also on YouTube. And he adds, that's Andrew, Joe, Greg, Lisa, William, and Sean. He's just along for the ride. And I'll give you that. They're smarter than you. I'll give you that one. But no, it's a great group, and I learned a bunch from them.
I have on replay. I'm usually completely bombarded at that time of day, Pacific time. But it's a great show.
Yeah, I've come back a couple times and my iPad's dead, and I was like, "What was on this?" Oh yeah, I gotta watch that now. And all right. So next on my list is economic independence and entrepreneurship. Economic independence refers to a community's ability to self-sustain without financially relying on government subsidies, corporate monopolies, or centralized institutions, i.e. Wall Street. Entrepreneurship plays a key role in fostering local owned businesses, creating jobs, and keeping wealth within the community. So how this applies is local businesses instead of corporate chains. A free community prizes their small, locally owned businesses over self-reliance or over reliance on multinational corporations, keeping that money in the community. Self-sufficient job creation, encourage trades, freelancing, cooperative business models instead of government-driven employment programs. And then alternative capital markets are key to this. So crowdfunding, private lending circles, and cryptocurrency-backed investments rather than traditional bank loans or government grants. Often a lot cheaper as well, and easier to get when someone in the community is applying for a loan within the community. So some stats on this. Small businesses account for nearly 100% of U.S. businesses. It's 99 point something percent. And that highlights their role in economic independence. Communities with higher rates of entrepreneurship experience 3% faster economic growth annually. Crowdfunding campaigns raised over $17 billion in 2021, demonstrating the power of decentralized funding. 50% of small businesses fail within 5 years due to a lack of financing and government overregulation. So if we can remove that from the mix, more businesses will succeed. And regions with strong small business ecosystems have 20% lower unemployment rates. So some beneficial actions to get this going in your community: encourage small business growth, reduce bureaucracy and unnecessary licensing to allow local businesses and small businesses to flourish, establish community investment pools, pool local resources to fund small businesses and keep wealth circulating in your community, develop localized skill training programs, provide workshops and mentorship in entrepreneurship, finance, and technical skills, foster peer-to-peer lending and crowdfunding, support new businesses with decentralized funding models, emphasize barter and trade networks, encourage alternative commerce to lessen reliance on government-controlled fiat currency, and promote localized supply chains, reduce dependency on outside goods by sourcing locally, which we found was so important during COVID when all of these global supply chains dried up on us. So out of those, Mike, which jump out at you as the most important?
Well, the last five you mentioned are all facilitated by the first one that you mentioned, which is just elimination of bureaucracy, elimination of everything that could possibly impede entrepreneurship, economic growth, risk-taking, what have you. There's so much nonsense licensing that affects, I'd say, a good percentage of our townships throughout the country, and other countries probably even more so or even worse. These are the impediments to what you mentioned in the last five things that you mentioned. All of those things right in a row. If there was a complete lifting and almost an elimination, essentially, of regulatory impediments, all those things would rise to the surface. All those things would materialize, and all of them would benefit, by and large, the immediate local community, your local township. I can't think of anything that would benefit a local township economically more than just a removal of all red tape possible. I'd say that the only thing that townships certainly have a right to determine, like, kind of how things are developed, in a sense, like in particular real estate development. I think there's certainly nothing wrong with townships saying, we only want this type. We don't want lower density housing rather than high density housing. It's okay to kind of, I'd say, for a township to say, this is the type of environment we're looking to create here. So you developers, that's great. We want you to work with us, but this is what you're going to build here. That makes perfect sense to me. It's not asking too much to decide this is the type of housing and commercial space that we want built in our township. But beyond that, make it completely like unburdened by by regulations, by inspections, by anything. Let the market kind of determine that, and I watch entrepreneurship just flourish. Watch all those the last 5 things that you mentioned on that list would all come from a completely freed up marketplace, local marketplace. It also would draw in the best and the brightest from the surrounding areas that maybe don't want to deal with those limitations, those regulations, and those stifling regulatory crushings of competition, of new entrants into the marketplace, and entrepreneurship and innovation. I mean, so much of that is, you mentioned that in one of your
We've got the freeze again. Let me remove him. I'm going to add, Chris said a bit earlier and I missed it, but justice is blind, but those who claim to serve her have their eyes wide open and look to do injustice. Really good point, Chris. Especially when justice isn't local, right? Like when you're dealing with people in your community and you don't know the rehabilitation options, or even just the ability to, do reconciliation in some form, whether it's in person or financial. We can solve these things in other ways instead of incarceration. That's something that Cash and I talk about a bunch. So, Mike dropped out. Hopefully he'll come back in here. Take this opportunity to share again, if you don't mind. We've got over 200 people in here. It'd be nice to get this a little bit bigger and get this out to more people. And if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Terry is back watching the chat for us and making sure we get all the questions and comments up on the screen that we can. And so let's see here. I'm going to jump to private property, land use, and homesteading. So private property rights ensure individuals and communities control land without government interference. So homesteading allows people to claim, develop, and maintain land through productive use, fostering self-sufficiency, as well as economic autonomy. So some examples of this are self-sustaining homesteads, families producing their own food, energy, and shelter on privately owned land, privately owned community spaces, community-owned parks, meeting halls, and markets free from government oversight, and freedom from eminent domain. We talk about eminent domain being evil, but defending against government land seizures for public use. Oh, Mike's back. Welcome back, Mike.
Thank you. I actually just decided to check my internet connection, and I was on somebody else's internet while I'm plugged into the Ethernet cable of my. I don't know how that happened, guys. Sorry about that.
Was it Wi-Fi FBI or something like that?
You know what? I wouldn't put it past that, but it was. I have Cox's internet provider, and all of a sudden I was on Cox's Wi-Fi. I'm like, I didn't sign. It's just weird. So anyway, I'm plugged into actually my internet connection through Ethernet. We should have no more interruptions.
It looks clearer too, so that's good. So I'm talking about private property, land use, and homesteading. So I am to the statistics, and this one blew my mind. Privately owned land only accounts for about 50% of the total land in the U.S. So the government owns half the land in the U.S. and gets to choose what to use it for.
Outrageous.
And homesteading has increased 25% in the past decade as more Americans seek out self-sufficiency and getting off of the grid. This is another one that'll blow your mind, Mike. This might knock you off the internet. Over 1.3 million acres of private land were seized for eminent domain purposes in the last 20 years.
That's just, I mean, this is so far from what Jefferson and Madison, and this is so far from that, from anything they would have ever tolerated. I mean, unreal.
Eric says decentralization has its downfall when you accidentally connect to someone else's Wi-Fi.
It does. It truly does. Well, that's just it. It's even worse than that, Eric. It's this collective Cox Wi-Fi, which, you know, it belongs to all Cox customers. I'm like, that's horrible. It's a horrible idea. I didn't connect. That wasn't my doing. So yeah, I'm suspicious.
Speaking of Cox, Casey thinks it was Gavin Newsom that hacked your machine.
At this point, I mean, my phone's been acting weird. Who knows? I think he's on to me, but I'm on to him too.
Speaking of Cox, Terry wants to know if it was Newsom or Elon.
That's, you know what? I got to say Newsom because I haven't overtly attacked Elon Musk yet. But
well, there might be somebody on this broadcast that said some things.
There might be somebody, right? Yeah, that's true.
Nobody, in my defense, nobody heard it because I'm so shadow banned on Free Speech X.
Because of the guy you criticized, yes.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about government overreach and, you know, them protecting their cronies and the insurance industry, and you get in a little trouble. So, and yeah, he thinks it would be my Mac if it was Elon. So self-sufficient homesteads can reduce household expenses by up to 50% annually. And in 2021, farmland prices rose by 7.4%, making land ownership an increasingly valuable asset. Mm-hmm. So, so beneficial actions to get this going in your community: strengthen property rights protections, establish legal defense mechanisms against land grabs and eminent domain seizures, encourage homesteading and self-sufficiency, promote local food production, off-grid living, microgrids, energy independence, create private land trusts, prevent government intrusion through legally protected community-owned lands, develop alternative dispute resolution systems, use private arbitration instead of government courts for property disputes, advocate for local zoning independence, fight against restrictive land use regulations from centralized power that limit property use, and then educate people on legal strategies for land ownership. Teach legal methods for securing and maintaining private land. Which of those jump out at you as a beneficial action?
Well, there has to be a legal underpinning to anything, anything that you're doing. I think, what really appeals to me just kind of instinctively is a true homestead, a self-sustaining home or a self-sustaining neighborhood, not even so much as a community or a township, but even just an immediate neighborhood, having some, a co-op farm, a co-op method of generating energy, a co-op method for basically being completely, it's not so much off-grid, but microgrid, right? I think off-grid in a sense, as much as you can be in a suburban or even urban environment, but microgrid, if you're going to go like community level, I think just that practical method of being able to literally run your own show in your household, in your immediate community, can lead to all the other things that you mentioned. And you still need, though, a kind of, I'm going to say equal importance. I don't want me to pick one, but really you can't really do all of that unless you also have a legal defense that can make that happen. And the fact that the statistics you gave are staggering about eminent domain, about how much land, just real estate that the government owns, that's staggering to the point where we want to be able to defend against land grabs, right? We want to be able to, you can't just have the government come and say, which is really the primary, in my opinion, other than supporting the second most diabolical aspect of the war on drugs is, not just the free labor from feeding the prison industrial complex, but the land grabbing that can go with that through eminent domain. There has to be a defense against that. So that's your defense, but your offense is, creating an environment where households and or immediate neighborhoods can become as self-sustaining as possible with water, with the natural resources, energy, generating power, and of course growing and raising your own food. And yes, even Donnie's chickens and all those, I mean, livestock. I mean, why not? Why not have micro farming, highly localized farming? I mean, heck, you could even do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that even in an urban environment, right? I mean, just zoning, right? But if you're carving out a liberated township, in the middle of Chicago, for example, why not, put, indoor farming, even raise some livestock? I mean, what's to stop you? But that's the kind of thing that by necessity enables you to be, functionally as independent as possible, regardless of what they made, or just about regardless of what they might throw at you. But there needs to be a legal defense to that. So you really can't have one without the other. There needs to be a way to defend against any sort of legal claim that the government may have or drum up against you.
And Zach says that's a manipulation for developer land grabs.
100%. Well, let's, and without trying to digress too much, but this is kind of topical for where I live. There's been, this isn't not just the recent ones, but there have been several fires which have been determined to be set by arsonists in just the last, say, 7-8 years in Southern California that led to land grabs. I mean, I do think obviously that's a huge component of what happened in Maui. I'm not an expert on it, but I've certainly done enough of an overview to suspect that that's what a lot of these tragic fires, these out of control fires, that are all about, especially ones where we know it was set by arson, like the recent LA fires. So all of that we should cast a very serious suspicion on. And I think there needs to be a highly decentralized, locally accountable response for disaster relief in general, particularly fires, and particularly here in Southern California and a few other fire-sensitive parts of the world.
And let's see. Chris says HOAs openly work against free townships and agorist models of independence.
Yes, they do to an extent. However, I think also the a good agorist could impose their own voluntary association, right? Community association, and not only circumvent but replace the role of the HOA. HOAs are more vulnerable, I think, than they ever have been to that type of thing, to being replaced by something else. Because there's no, I mean, it's all, especially within the ascent of smart contracts. I mean, the whole idea of an HOA kind of becomes redundant and unnecessary if you can replace it with something else. Again, like a trust that can facilitate your infrastructure needs down to your community and immediate neighborhood level. Who needs an HOA? They can be replaced probably even easier than a local government.
And Zach adds, my aunt's neighbors have chickens on the north side of a neighborhood in Cincinnati. It's a great example.
Okay, yeah.
That's allowed more places than you would think. So
Really?
like you said, Donnie is an expert in that kind of stuff. And she was great on the show the other day. And Chris says that Cash needs to do a guest appearance on here. That would be cool. Well, yeah. I think you were on last night, but we've been doing, and I'll pull this up here. We've been doing a series. Yeah, Faith and Freedom, Liberating Our Inner Cities. So what we're trying to do on that show is we're trying to show how these techniques aren't just for suburbs and rural areas, but they can actually work in the inner city to empower neighborhoods and communities in the inner city for the same outcomes that we're talking about here: self-sufficiency, a strong local economy. All of those things can be done many times in a city just as well as they can be done outside of the city.
Yeah, that's really opened my eyes a lot. I've met some folks who are really into decentralizing the city of Los Angeles, especially now. There's a building in 1010 Wilshire in downtown Los Angeles that, I mean, is already it's a residential building, but they have so much room and rooftops. The rooftop has been converted into a garden already, and could very easily that format could be expanded to include every other type of self-sufficiency. They have massive solar panels. It pulls very little from the Los Angeles power grid, and I'm thinking this could be duplicated just about any in any major city. I'm reminded, like for example, London is basically considered a collection of townships, right? Of just smaller townships. It's just a vast, sprawling collection of townships. And there are certainly some that want to detach from City Hall and the absolutely dystopian mayor that they have there, and are, encouraging people to sabotage the tax cameras, the ULEZ cameras. The Blade Runners of London are legendary. So there's already forces at work in a lot of major cities to decentralize those cities.
And Zach says, tragedy aside, most land grabs are due to too much money in local politics and too much local zoning manipulation and kickbacks to
billions and billions and billions of dollars. He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I've observed it firsthand, Zach. I mean, I've talked to some of the people who are involved in some of these fires, actually. So were pinched and wrongfully accused, went to jail, and were later acquitted of committing the arsons, when meanwhile the real arsonist is not even being pursued and never was. So much suspicious stuff in Southern California. It's unreal. That's because there's billions and tens of billions of dollars in play at any given time.
Chris says HOAs in Texas are like Karen mafias. I mean,
HOAs same in California, Chris.
HOAs are going to be the same as any local governance, though. If you're not involved, it's going to be overrun by those who want to tell you what to do. So,
yeah,
if you're not involved, that's what's going to happen. I love my HOA. It's affordable. I don't have to do squat. When a hurricane comes through, everything gets taken care of. They do a great job. But
yeah, there are exceptions to the rule, right? I mean, there are some good HOAs, but it really depends on how much, how responsive they are to the people in the HOA, and if the people in the HOA actually take the initiative and the responsibility to rein in their HOA and make it represent their will. When they don't, I think it's you have an easier time replacing an HOA than a local governing body. They're very similar, but I think HOAs are more vulnerable, I think, to any serious action, especially the ones that are unresponsive to actively involved members.
Yeah, like in my neighborhood or in my area, like, you could pay a few $100 for your HOA, or you could pay thousands of bucks. I mean, it's crazy. And so when I was looking for a new place to live, that was high on my list. And you got to ask, like, do you like your HOA? I mean, I asked a couple of people, and do you think it's good? Because some of them around here are just absolutely terrible. And you get all sorts of notices, every time you open your windows. Some of them, you can't have your garage open for a period of time. I mean, it's just wacky stuff.
Orange County, California's got tons of HOAs where, you have an oil stain on your driveway, you get fined. I mean, it's all sorts of crazy stuff.
All right. So mistakes communities should avoid: allowing government to define land use. Zoning laws can restrict freedom and economic opportunity. Failing to defend against eminent domain. Governments frequently seize property under the guise of public good. And like we said, I mean, it could be millions of acres. Over-reliance on government communities. When communities are dependent on public utilities, they remain vulnerable to regulation. So, look into, energy independence through, either, yourself or through microgrids. Not preparing for property tax increases. Without financial planning, property owners can become a liability, or property ownership can become a liability. Ignoring legal frameworks for ownership. Failure to establish clear titles can lead to disputes and government intervention. And then underestimating the cost of self-sufficiency. So homesteading or self-reliance requires planning, labor, and a long-term commitment to make it work. Which of those do you think are the biggest mistakes to avoid?
I'd say that if you are not prepared, like there has to be a real plan to decentralize and decouple. I like to say decouple from larger governing bodies. And obviously a self-sustaining home, a homestead, self-sustaining neighborhood, and community too, like scaling up, kind of the definition of the size, but having that self-sustaining community is a good substitute if making your home isn't really cost effective, right? It may be something that you do have to share as a co-op, and you do have to voluntarily share as as kind of a joint effort in a township, in a community, or in better yet, a neighborhood. As decentralized as possible of a unit. That is something that really needs to be analyzed, because that decoupling from centralized utilities, centralized power, centralized governance is critical if you're going to have. That's how you have something for sure that you can defend, right? That's worth defending against eminent domain, against all these all these potential outside forces. But you have to kind of know what you're getting into, and so failure to plan for that, and if you are trying to, for example, build out your home to be energy self-sustaining, to be able to grow, but you're discovering that, wow, maybe my backyard really isn't big enough, or my balcony space even, or whatever it is you're trying to grow your own food, and maybe this is too cumbersome, or it has become too costly, it's outside my reach to make myself a completely power independent type of home. Well, then you look towards the community, right? You look towards your immediate neighborhood, and what can we do cooperatively to come to that same end? And that's where, again, the smart contracts come in. That's where we can still build that independence into, if not into our individual households, into a neighborhood. So that to me is kind of like, okay, so cost benefit analysis. Is it feasible for the people in this immediate neighborhood to completely make their home independent and self-sustaining, or do we have to look to the neighborhood level? Do we have to go one step above that and share cooperatively among neighbors to generate that kind of independence and decoupling from larger entities? So that's probably a critical part of the equation, to get that kind of in your head as to what the best next step is, and it will vary from household to household, from neighborhood to neighborhood. But that's the important question you have to ask before you embark on any of this.
So next on my list of the anatomy of a free community is parallel economies and alternative currencies. So parallel economies operate outside the control of the government and the mainstream financial systems, using alternative currencies, barter, and decentralized finance tools. These systems enhance economic resilience and reduce the dependence on fiat money controlled by central banks. Examples are cryptocurrency adoption, a community using Bitcoin or Monero for transactions to bypass government-controlled banking, local currencies or time banks, alternative monetary systems that keep wealth circulating within the community, barter networks and underground markets, direct trade systems that allow businesses and individuals to operate outside of traditional financial institutions. And some stats on this. This is another one that'll blow your mind, Mike. Cryptocurrency transactions exceeded $15 trillion in 2021, showing massive adoption despite government restrictions. There are over 5,000 local currencies that have been created globally in an attempt to resist financial centralization. 30% of U.S. small businesses now accept cryptocurrency payments. Barter exchange facilitates over $12 billion in transactions annually in the U.S. alone. And gold and silver purchases for private investment increased by 28% in 2022 as people sought alternatives to fiat currency. So some beneficial ways to advance this in your community: educate the community on alternative currencies, teach residents about cryptocurrency, precious metals, local currencies, establish your own local currency or a time bank, keep wealth within your community through an independent financial system, encourage bartering and direct trade, promote skill sharing and goods exchange networks, support decentralized finance or DeFi, use blockchain-based financial tools to provide alternative lending and investments, develop peer-to-peer payment networks, enable secure anonymous transactions without banks or financial institutions, and then resist government restrictions on private transactions. Advocate against regulations that limit financial freedom. Mike, what jumps out at you?
All right. So the one thing I really like, of course, I from just being sort of only superficially aware of what's happening in the crypto space, but people who I know are a lot smarter than me, Econ Bro, for example, would tell me that Monero is kind of the way to go. And who am I to disagree? I think there's maybe a few other variations in the crypto space, but also, especially when you're dealing with a local community, a township level, I think it's hard to argue with the power of as alternative currency, just raw, hard gold, silver, precious metals. That combination, I think, works really well in tandem at the local level, at the township level. So I think that will provide some of the other really beneficial things that you mentioned: alternative lending, alternative banking. I even think there's room to discuss and this idea of having a local investment. That is to say, a highly decentralized, scaled down version of almost like a localized stock market of sorts, where people can invest in local businesses, and also the more voluntary and strictly for crowdfunding, those approaches as well. But with the idea that you have kind of a blockchain monitoring happening, and you also have a intense devotion to using alternative currencies for all of this, such as, again, Monero. I have another friend who's kind of working on a cryptocurrency that's rooted in the value of gold mines. I think that's kind of compelling. And then, of course, the actual tangible gold, silver, and tangible assets like that. So I think that approach kind of, again, unlocks the rest of the beneficial things you mentioned in your list. And it really kind of unlocks the potential of local versus larger, anything larger. It's certainly, it's like almost like a counter to Wall Street in that sense.
So this will sound weird coming from me as an anarchist, but in my decentralized mind, I have two queens. We've got Terry, and then we've got Creole Queen. So
Creole Queen, yes,
great to have you. I was singing your praises for getting my YouTube working, so appreciate you for that. All right, Mike. So mistakes communities should avoid: failing to build trust in alternative currencies. If people don't believe in the value of alternative currencies, they won't use it. Right. And then neglecting security in digital transactions, weak encryption or poor privacy practices can make it collapse, leading to financial loss. Overlooking liquidity issues. Parallel economies need enough users to function effectively. Ignoring legal risks. Some governments criminalize alternative currency use.
Yes, they do.
Lack of merchant adoption. Without businesses accepting alternative currencies, they lose practicality. And then failure to provide an onboarding process. If people don't know how to use these tools, they won't participate. So which of these mistakes do you think is the most, the one that should be avoided?
Well, the last two you mentioned are highly related, right? I mean, if people don't know how to onboard and participate in this type of counter currency, I'll come right out and say, then that's going to make it difficult for it to be adopted and for particularly local merchants to use. And it'll also be particularly difficult for people to kind of form to take it to its full potential as a local entity. is something that this locality, this township does. That's relatively unique to that township and reflects, the business activity of that township. But if you don't have a way, if people aren't comfortable with how to interact with that, then they're going to be, some of the things you mentioned more at the beginning of your list, they're going to be fearful and they're not going to adapt to it. They're like, okay, well, I'm not so sure about this. There's going to be a little too much insecurity about it, in spite of the fact that it's pretty obvious over the last 4 years since Operation Warp Speed and the CARES Act and all that nonsense, that there is a real dramatic loss in the dollar's value, and it doesn't really show a whole lot of sign of stopping. Maybe it's slowing down a bit because production will go up, but that's a real crater in dollar value that is substantial enough to be very noticeable and it should be very concerning to most people. I believe it is, but that alone may not be enough to get people to try alternative methods of currency, alternative methods of transacting. So there really has to be a comfortable level, a highly comfortable and user-friendly method of adopting your alternative and adopting your counter currency. So that's I think probably the biggest and most important obstacle to overcome. But the good news is I think it's really highly overcomable based on just some of the stuff that I've observed and some of the softwares that are being developed to be able to facilitate that. So I'm optimistic that that's possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer to this one, Chris, but Chris asks, how can we use developing tech, AI, drones, crypto, torrents to further grow township independence? And, for me, my thought is, see what projects are already out there. People are doing great things already, and see how you can, adopt what others are building. The example we always use is our friend Mark in New Zealand is doing a direct democracy software project that's going to provide, the ability for constituents to directly have an impact on how their money is used and transparency in government spending and projects. So, find people like Mark that are already doing it and see if you can contribute. But, there's all sorts of projects out there in all of those areas where people have already built some pretty cool stuff. So I would start there. Yeah,
start with what people are already doing. But Chris brings up a kind of an interesting point because you mentioned drones, right? I guess that's kind of highly topical right now. And I do think there's something to be said about developing. I'm not going to say drone. I'm going to say go ahead and say counter drone technology. Counter is my favorite word for tonight, I guess. But counter drone technology, I think, is actually going to be pretty important. Because that's where things are getting really, highly suspicious. I think we have to develop a way to, kind of counteract that level of surveillance, that sort of unmitigated surveillance that I think is already happening with, I'll go ahead and say it, government drones. Casey talks about this a lot, and I think he's right. I think we need to really start developing a counter drone technology, and that's only natural. Shotgun is definitely a counter drone tech, yes. But I think, in Casey, I love that, but I think there's got to be also maybe a more subtle and stealthy way to counteract that kind of surveillance state, unchecked surveillance state that we're experiencing with drone technology. And also, drones can deliver really dangerous stuff. Think about this, and I try not to get too far down the rabbit hole on this, but think about what a drone could conceivably do. If you have a self-sustaining community that you want to make as much no longer self-sustaining as possible. This reminds me of a Walking Dead episode. You would maybe fly your drones as stealthily as possible and poison crops and do this is the kind of thing, unfortunately, I think we do have to think about in the long term. And we have to, as a means of self-defense, townships have to kind of, I think, develop this, at least some kind of a way to anticipate, some of the uglier potential things that people are calling conspiracy theories right now that kind of aren't. I think there has to be, shoot or launch. Yeah, exactly. I mean, anything along those lines, or Casey, focused electromagnetic pulses. Things. I mean, I have some really high tech friends who say, "Oh yeah, we can position it in a electromagnetic burst to take out a drone." I'm like, it sounds like it could do a lot more damage than to other things in the area, but they insist that no, you can focus it now. And then of course I'm thinking, well, so government probably has that technology too. So what are we? Either way, it becomes sort of a compelling idea. But my thought is always, if enough townships are doing this, then we have a shot at protecting ourselves from some of the more sinister things that I think may be out there, including, what I think the government is already doing, and Casey agrees, using drones for surveillance opportunities.
Yeah, and Sean joined us, and he had a great comment. Create your own society where you trade, barter, use precious metals. 100%.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. I mean, when a cryptocurrency and blockchain just isn't a very adaptable, bottom line is you can't argue with the intrinsic value of precious metals. It's without. I mean, there's no contest. That's always going to be money.
Yeah, there's some comments going on in the chat about the corruptibility of the blockchain and Bitcoin and the feds and all that. I'm not going to go there because we're trying to encourage it, but
no,
I do get it.
I think Monero fixes most of those concerns, but I do understand the concern about Bitcoin now. But nonetheless, I mean, you go with what works, but what always will work, and to the point that Sean mentioned, you're always going to be able to, like, there's no way precious metals are not going to be money. They'll always be money. They always have been. They always will be.
I had a Zoom issue going on here. What did I do? Let's see if that fixed it. There we go. Yeah, Zach says if you're going to adopt blockchain technology, you have to have scalability in its use. Yeah, I mean, again, you're going to want to look for somebody that's doing a project or something. Like I know Mark is with Direct Democracy. Like he's going to do some hand holding when different communities launch that technology. So
right, you have to form a community around that technology to really kind of train users on it. You mentioned onboarding earlier. That's how you do it. You have to have a community sort of teach itself and its members how to adapt to that.
And Creole Queen said, "You're welcome," and really appreciate you, Creole Queen.
Yes.
And all right, so next on my list, Mike, is one that I was actually very proud of us when we were talking to Donnie and some of the other people that she brought on, because we're the ones that have been talking about food and energy independence, which is my next topic. And I think that it's completely underrated. People are talking about banning, red dye number 40 or whatever. Like I say, skip that whole thing and practice food independence in your own community.
Right.
So
it solves all those problems.
100%.
Yeah. The top down approach. Yeah. I mean, it may be well intentioned on the part of RFK Jr., but it's ultimately just more top down. Big government telling us what to do, kind of thing, and all the pitfalls that go with that. Whereas the bottom up solutions thread that you posted yesterday, which I reposted, is absolutely on point. It takes care of all the same things without having a Leviathan government still in place.
Did you see I got unfollowed 59 times by probably libertarians for doing my rope-a-dope Maha post where I said, let's do Maha, except do the opposite of what they want to do instead of centralizing everything and banning everything. Like, let's take it back local.
But that's the thing. People, if they're only going to give you a superficial read, you don't necessarily want them as followers anyway, because you are actually doing the very libertarian thing, and that is providing the libertarian alternative to a statist solution. I mean, that's what we should be doing all day long. If we're going to try to win people over to the libertarian cause, we need to be addressing the concerns and telling people, educating why the top-down solution is not the best solution.
Yeah.
Which is what you did.
59 unfollows and a bunch of blocks. Didn't really work out well for me, but I gave it a try.
What does that stop you before? Right.
Yeah. And Sean says, get with Lars about energy.
That's true.
I had Lars back on, when I was doing this on Spaces, we had Lars and he was awesome. And Lars is kind of surfaced again on social media. So I'm hoping that means more good Lars stuff is coming, because he is by far one of the big thinkers and innovators in our space. So we are much better off if Lars is active in our movement. So
he's done proof of concept. For a lot of our libertarian ideals, he's He's proven it. He's done it. This is what works.
And Zach says, get with Lars about anything. Absolutely.
Yes,
Lars is extremely smart about all of this stuff. So, all right. So food and energy independence, after I hurt my arm patting ourselves on the back there.
right.
So food and energy independence ensures that a community can sustain itself without relying on centralized agricultural supply chains or government-controlled utilities. This includes local farming, off-grid or microgrid energy production, and decentralized food networks. So how it applies is you could do things like community-owned solar grids, which would be the microgrid concept, generating electricity independent of state-controlled power systems or regionally controlled power systems, decentralized food production, local farms, co-ops, and food forests that provide sustenance without corporate dependency. And then alternative fuel and energy storage using biodiesel, wood gasification, or battery reserves to maintain energy security. And so some stats on this are 40% of all US food is controlled by just 4 corporations, limiting local access. Home gardening has increased by 300% since the 2020 government shutdown as people sought food independence. Over 80% of US electricity comes from centralized grids, making communities vulnerable to outages and government mismanagement, as you find out all the time in California.
Absolutely. But thankfully, not so much where I live in Orange County, but much further to the north, central and northern California, absolutely all the time. All kinds of power outages when there shouldn't be. This is the 5th largest economy in the world, really the 4th. And we have power outages. There's no excuse for that. It's nonsense.
And solar panel installation costs have dropped by 70% in the last decade, making energy independence more accessible. And local food systems reduce food waste by up to 50% compared to centralized supply chains. So some beneficial actions you can do to get this going in your community: establish local farming and permaculture practices, grow food year-round with regenerative agriculture, invest in off-grid energy solutions, solar, wind, hydro, and then battery storage should be prioritized to make that solution sustainable. Create decentralized food distribution networks, farmers markets, food co-ops, and bartering systems. Build water independence. Looking at you, California. Build water independence, rainwater collection, and private well drilling ensure sustainability. Stockpile non-perishable food and energy reserves. We've got all sorts of water and stuff here for when things go bad and we get boil orders and all that. Yes. Ensure you have what you need for the long term and a backup supply for emergencies. And then resist government overreach in food production. Looking at you, RFK Jr. Oppose regulations that limit self-sufficiency. So which of those do you think is the most beneficial, Mike?
Okay, so the 2 things that stand out the most, I think in everywhere. You did mention water, and you're right. California has an issue with that. That's huge, but I'm going to say energy independence and food independence. The first 2 that you mentioned are probably the 2 most important, and they go hand in hand. And hear me out. The water situation, at least on a individual household and community level, kind of goes hand in hand with the energy independence. And here's why. There has been a device. I think it's been around. The technology has been around like almost 15 years. Devices have been around for at least 13 years that pull moisture from the air to generate water. It's obviously not something you can do as easily in truly arid parts of of the world, but thankfully those aren't terribly densely populated areas. So I think I'm still speaking for the majority of places across the world when I say if you have a way to generate your own power and you install machines from that draw power from that decentralized power structure that can pull moisture from the air, you solve your water problem, not for fighting fires, but for growing your food, which is the next most important, and I think parallel importance, which is growing your own food. Again, another great sort of gift that California, I think, gave everybody, gave the rest of the world, is the ability to indoor farm, in indoor farming and agriculture. And as a hint, it's because of cannabis, because we had to do that before it finally got decriminalized. And even its decriminalization or legalization, I should say, would have been better if it was decriminalized in 2016, wasn't as comprehensive as it could and should be. The medical use was actually better in 1996. But the point being is that Californians became really good at indoor farming. And that sort of agriculture indoors is exactly what most suburban and urban communities, townships need to be self-sustaining. And with that comes the need to have a sustainable power source, one that isn't dependent on that 80% grid, of which, that's way too large for Americans to be dependent on a grid. That 80% of Americans are dependent on some larger power structure and grid is actually really staggering when you think about it, how significantly vulnerable we are. When they talk a lot about, these threats from foreign powers and whatnot, well, what do you suppose that is? That's what would you do if you were actually a foreign power wanting to mess up the United States? Let alone the fact that I think our own government is far more dangerous than any foreign power, but you would target the power grid because it's the easiest way to cripple the most people. So that needs to be reversed first and foremost. And along with that comes the food independence if you do it right, particularly with indoor farming. And there's other reasons why I think indoor farming is going to be important that are too lengthy to get into here. And I don't want to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole either. But I think for those of you that know what I'm talking about, you know what I mean, why indoor farming I think is going to be particularly important.
Yeah, and you were talking about the power grid and manipulating that could be, a huge problem. And, by my research, I don't remember the exact number, but it was something like 80% of all government IT systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks. So by relying on the government and relying on the grid and relying on all those things, huge problems can come from that.
Yeah.
Some great comments here. What's that?
You're talking about the government being vulnerable to something. A government that's kind of good, except when you realize that they're also maintaining the power grid for 80% of Americans. That needs to change right away.
Sean added.
That was a good comment. I could just from the first few sentences from Creole Queen. But go ahead.
I don't know what happened there. I'm in a different interface, so I think it was start and unstart real quick or something.
I saw what you're saying, Creole Queen, and you're right. But I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole tonight. Yes, weather warfare. Yes. Yeah. People think I'm crazy, but I think it's a real thing.
Yeah, I don't know what I think about that. I think they're all bad, and I want them to leave me alone, and I want to defund them so they can do less bad stuff.
That's exactly right.
All right, so Sean added raise bees.
Raise bees, sure.
Good one. Zach added learn canning.
Yes, and other old school 19th century methods of food preservation. Absolutely. Yes.
Chris nominated Willie Nelson for biodiesel czar.
Might as well.
Andy's here. We can start.
Andy.
Speaking of water supply, our thirst trap is here.
Right.
And then Creole Queen said she completely agrees. We have to speak up. And how else do we win others over to our side?
It requires a lot of patience, Creole Queen, but we don't have a choice. We have a world full of people who have been indoctrinated into an almost Stockholm syndrome-like state towards their governments. So we just have to be the patient educators to the contrary. It takes effort, man. It's not easy, right? I lose my patience, and that's usually when you don't see me online for a while. It's because I've lost my patience. But we don't really have a choice. We have to educate. Yes, Casey agrees too. Thank you, Casey.
I'm shocked Casey agrees with that one. Shocked.
Casey, I swear I've seen it. We'll talk offline.
What's up, Thirst Trap?
This guy.
And yeah, so mistakes to avoid. Relying solely on grocery stores and traditional supply chains. When disruption occurs, dependency leads to crises. Ignoring soil regeneration and crop rotation, which is one of the biggest problems with these corporate farms is it's cheaper for them to just burn the soil out and buy more land than to do the traditional stuff like crop rotation. And sustainable farming practices are essential for long-term food security. We can't just destroy our land.
Can we just say that big farming is as dangerous as big pharma? It is. It's just as dangerous, with just as many dangerous implications for the population. You're right. It's man. I can't wait to decentralize agriculture. I was really hoping we get a Secretary of Agriculture that would lead us that direction. I don't know about this guy. I think he was just confirmed today. I don't know if he's going to do that or not. I just don't know enough about him.
Is it Burnham? Doug Burnham,
I think
governor of North Dakota, or not North Dakota, wherever he is. I don't like him.
I should know more about that.
Yeah. So, all right. Where was I here? So that was, yeah. All right. So to energy storage, which I mentioned. And, I was going to follow up on your comment about big ag. Again, I'm proud of us because we've been talking about how bad big ag is. And they're talking about banning, red food dye number 40 or whatever. Like, I don't eat that shit. Like,
it's like,
I don't need your help there.
That already. Thank you.
I don't need your help there. Like, stop Monsanto from completely destroying the food supply.
Right.
Like, stop giving them subsidies to do it.
Subsidies
stop making it impossible for local farms to sell us food and local ranchers to sell us meat.
Repeal
Stop
legislation, right? Repeal legislation that favors big agriculture. Repeal the legislation that creates big agriculture. That's how you make America healthy again. And I get frustrated. Anyway, I get a little bit like annoyed at how people think that somehow the solution is still top down when the problem came from top down.
Yeah. All right. So failing to secure off-grid energy storage without backup systems, energy independence is pretty much impossible, and it'll become a fragile system. Underestimating the cost of energy independence. The initial investments can be high, but once you get there, costs can go down and reliability going up. Neglecting community collaboration. Energy and food independence requires the entire community's cooperation. Ignoring government regulations on self-sufficient living. Many states, shockingly, impose restrictions on independent utilities and food production. And, they'll probably come and, kick in your door if you're selling lettuce to your neighbors without the right permits, right? So let's see. Zach says, Mike, maybe they're just NPCs. And Andy says, the government's plan has been making people complacent, and they've had a very large head start.
Yes, or even worse, Andy, making them fiercely loyal, like, again, Stockholm Syndrome writ large. This has been part of the plan, right? To make people think that without government, this goes back to Bastiat. That's why I think the 19th century is going to be provide very valuable insight into the 21st century. Bastiat wrote that people are now believing. He's talking about stuff in the 19th century that people thought without government. We hear without government, who would build the roads? Well, the 19th century was no different. Like without government, how would people farm? Why would people farm? We need government to provide these things. It's as if you think people really get that idea that without government, none of society really doesn't function. People don't do what they're supposed to do in terms of providing goods and services without government. That's how far gone people are. and we got a long way to go. But I think the tide is turning. I think we're people are really starting to notice that maybe the government isn't so trustworthy after all. At least, again, enough people. All we need is a tireless minority. That's the optimistic take I keep trying to focus on, is we don't need a majority. We just need a tireless minority, and we can shift things at least enough to have, a free enough portion of society for people like us.
And let's see here. Curl Queen says, me either. Only thing I drink, my Powerade, 0 grape. But other than that, I stay away from food dyes, no processed junk food, drinks, nothing. Yeah, I mean,
no need to ban it. Yeah, that's why drug prohibition I thought was always stupid for me. It's like, I'm not interested. I'm as square as they come. I don't need somebody to tell me don't do that, or we'll throw you in jail for 5 years, for possessing some mind-altering substance. Like, I'm not going to do the minor. That doesn't interest me anyway. I don't need nanny state to tell me what to do.
Zach says Vermin Supreme or bust. Free ponies for everybody.
Vermin, yes.
The downside is mandatory teeth brushing.
Yes. So. I still love the. Free. We were talking. You mentioned a little bit on online today. The theatrics of congressional hearings in general, let alone for confirmation hearings. Just the theatrics of it. And people got annoyed with Vermin Supreme. He doesn't take it. He doesn't take his He doesn't take politics seriously. It's like, neither should anyone. It's like that was sort of the great point of Vermin Supreme being anywhere, getting any kind of attention whatsoever, is he highlighted how ridiculous politics really is. So I'm kind of a Vermin Supreme fan for that reason.
I'm a huge Vermin Supreme fan.
Yeah.
And I just love that he's got like these ongoing things. He started calling himself the day after the election President-elect Vermin Supreme, and just started telling people what he was going to do. And it just went on, all the way till January 20th. And now he's changed gears again, and he's just hilarious. So, I can't even handle the Congress thing. It's like, how they're going to vote. Like, why do we even put this on TV?
Theater. It's all theater. I mean, you've heard me say this all along too. It's all theater. It's a theater highlighting a game of mutual controlled opposition between two opposing forces that aren't really opposing each other. It's theatrical, by and large. Sure, do I think there's some actual sincere people here and there on the national scale, less so than on the local or even state scale, but. Yeah, it's by and large just theater.
Exactly. Zach said, I just want the free pony.
Who doesn't, right?
Well, I mean, everybody's getting a free pony. You're not special. To me, these congressional hearings, like when they're going after RFK and they're obviously paid by Big Pharma, to me, it's like
Elizabeth Warren, God bless her, self-owning. Love that.
Yeah.
Well, that was good. That was actually fun.
It's like getting caught cheating or something, where they're like, well, let's look at this a different way. Say we wanted Big Pharma, like we should have an open relationship with Big Pharma. Like, let's look at it that way instead,
right. A very California.
Yeah. I mean, just so dumb,
Yeah.
And he says, I think when they came up with the tax refund scam, it was the hook for people to start needing the government.
That was a very effective Stockholm syndrome tool, wasn't it, Andy? That's like, oh, I get a refund of your own money. And people still call it a refund. It's like, how is it a refund if it's your own money? Anyway, yeah.
Well, they act like it's, like a lottery.
You're getting a refund, yeah.
Yeah, I won the lottery. Like, no, it was your money, and you lent it to the government for free.
Interest free, right? Even if you left it in your savings account, you'd have more.
Yeah, and then I don't know if I don't think I said this one. Yeah, I did say that one. All right. And then Krill Queen's talking about the weather again. She says, "I've seen it. I promise it's real." Krill Queen. My look on this is simple. If we defund the federal government, all the crazy stuff goes away because they don't have money. So I try to keep my tiny brain pointed in one direction, where if we take away their money, all of the lab stuff goes away, all of the stuff in the atmosphere and outer space, and all of that goes away because they don't have money. Nobody's gonna, no corporation's going to pay them to do this stuff. They only can do it because we're lending them money tax free till we get the pittance of the refund, and they keep the rest of it. Like,
yeah, to keep the rest of our money to oppress us.
exactly.
It's Thomas Paine's worst nightmare come to life.
And then Zach says it's all depressing theater, and one reason why we're transitioning the road to WrestleMania in 3 weeks.
WrestleMania, God bless him.
And Curl Queen agrees on that. So yeah, I try to keep it simple. You know, the old kiss, keep it simple, stupid. That one is near and dear to my heart. And yeah, so let's talk about exit strategies and building free communities.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get out of this? What's the strategy? So exit strategies refer to methods of escaping state control and building independent, self-sufficient communities. This includes physical relocation, which I've personally done.
Yes.
Off-grid living, parallel economies, and legal structuring to minimize government interference. So I know you guys gave me some flack about this earlier, but one of my examples here is private gated communities and intentional societies. So residents forming self-governed communities with voluntary rules. You get to choose whether you want to live there or not,
100%.
and whether you want to live by those rules. We talked about off-grid homesteading, living independently of state-run utilities and food systems. And then this was big with the libertarians and also with the Scientologists, I believe, but seasteading and special economic zones, establishing autonomous living spaces completely outside of government jurisdiction. So that's an interesting one to think about. And so I'm just going to jump to the benefits because we're a little short on time here, but the 6 most beneficial actions for this are securing private land with strong property rights, developing alternative infrastructure and microgrids, water, energy, waste systems that are separate from state control, adopting a local currency and trade system, reducing that dependence on the centralized economies, forming those private security networks that we talked about earlier, establishing private legal and arbitration systems, so keeping the disputes out of the government courts. Which of those jump out at you, Mike?
Well, it's kind of funny. People were giving you a hard time about private gated communities and defended communities. I absolutely think that's a brilliant thing. Like, why wouldn't you want that, right? Not that I necessarily celebrate them as they are right now, but I think that in theory, if you have reason to believe that you're
oh boy, but how did you change to somebody else's network mid-sentence? That is a unique skill you got going there. We'll just assume whatever he was saying was brilliant. Let's just do that. And let's see here. Probably shouldn't go full screen to him with him frozen up like that. Andy says they will just print more. That's what happened in Greece, Argentina, Peru, Ecuador, Venezuela, and every other country that's money is worth less than toilet paper. Yes, it does. And let's see here. And then Chris added that Christopher Walken has a great movie about fighting Monsanto called Percy versus Goliath. I've not seen that. Should check that out. And all right, so I'm just going to continue because Mike's going to take a second here and we're almost out of time. So 6 mistakes communities should avoid: failing to plan for government resistance. That's always should be a focus of this. Any part of this you try to adapt. The state often targets those that are trying to be different and push back and aren't falling into line. Overlooking the importance of economic self-sufficiency. A free community must provide and produce its own wealth. Here he is. You're getting big with the dramatic exits and entrances, Mike. I don't know if I like this diva behavior from you.
No, you know what it is? It is very bizarre because I did not initiate this, and somehow I slipped over into, once again, Cox Community Wi-Fi. I didn't do that.
Speaking of Cox, do you think it was Elon or Gavin Newsom? Never mind.
It's somebody, but I don't really. But it's something that's not. I'm not initiating. So now my paranoia is through the roof. I think I may need to experiment with this further before we do this again next week, because this has now happened. I kind of trace the history. Is that each time I start off with my own Wi-Fi and somehow I slip into, and now I've got the window up where I can watch to see if that happens. Now that we're almost finished, but I'm looking at this saying this has happened now twice tonight. I did not initiate this. So yeah, my paranoia is going through the roof right now.
Andy, who is a very dramatic influencer and thirst trap on the internet, says very David Blaine.
Right? Unintentionally so, though. And I think with the I am just paranoid enough to think it's just something isn't right. Like I'm doing everything right on my end, and just arbitrarily, without my doing, I slip into somebody like a more public Wi-Fi. That's a little weird. It happened twice so far.
You can at least do something cool, like make the Statue of Liberty disappear, like David Copperfield did.
Like David Copperfield, right? Yeah, exactly.
Zach says internet monopolies need to be abolished with sound, marketable competition.
Here. Well,
apparently we just need to abolish Mike's neighbor's internet, and that'll solve the problem in this case.
Or something, yeah. Or I don't know. I'm beginning to be suspicious, but we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was saying a free community must produce its own wealth.
Yes.
Then another mistake to avoid is ignoring cybersecurity, like we talked about, and privacy. We live in a surveillance state, and that can easily undermine community independence. Neglecting those dispute resolution frameworks we talked about, internal conflict can easily lead to collapse of these communities. A lack of clear property and resource management. The community needs to be united on those. Ownership disputes must be prevented, and failing to build strong external trade relationships. Localism must connect to broader support networks. Anything that you caught there while you were doing your I'm here, I'm not here, peekaboo kind of thing?
Okay. Well, obviously, cybersecurity now, based on the very subjective recent experiences of this podcast, I'm going to say cybersecurity and privacy protection, because now my paranoia is pretty high. I'm actually now watching very carefully what happens with my internet, so that there's no ghost in the machine suddenly sliding me off of the internet service that I'm plugged into by Ethernet cable. But I'm beginning to suspect that might be a much more higher priority item than even the others, because this is the center of commerce and interaction, like it or not, for our modern 21st century society is internet. So in cybersecurity and privacy just jumped to the top of my list based on recent events. As far as the list of very important things you mentioned, that's the top of my mind.
And Creole Queen says all those things are super important.
Yes, they all are.
I do good lists. I'm good with the list.
Yeah.
Good with the hanging up on himself. I'm good with the lists.
Right. He's
got better people skills, so we make a good team. I hang up on myself less. I get kicked out of more places though. Mike's more the involuntary leaving. I'm more the leaving by force.
Yeah, coercively kicked out.
Yeah. Zach asks, "What are your thoughts on trillium domes? Are those like geodesic domes?"
Yeah, I mean, I like it just because it's so science fiction-y. Let's just try it. Just because it sounds cool. I think it deserves to be tried.
Is that that, like you said, is that was it Epcot, like the original example of those?
Yeah,
I don't know where I'm pulling this information from. It falls out of my head that I'm kind of shocked by.
Obscure old sci-fi film, Silent Running. Bruce Dern. They had the equivalent of trillium domes in space on the spacecraft, and anyway, it's a cool idea.
Zach, you start talking about my microphone, I'm going to start talking about you wearing necklaces on the outside of your shirt. Just saying. All right. So in closing, our last topic here is the future of liberty and free communities. So the future of liberty depends on decentralization, economic independence, voluntary cooperation, and resistance to government control. Free communities must innovate, adapt, and build parallel structures that outcompete the state. And some examples of this are expansion of decentralized technology, like we talked about, getting involved in those projects, blockchain, cryptocurrency, peer-to-peer networks, and having those replace state-controlled systems like the ones that are failing Mike pretty much every day in California, including now. The rise of parallel societies, free communities creating self-sufficient economies, legal structures and security, legal and physical strategies for sovereignty, establishing special economic zones, independent settlements, and self-governing entities. And some important stats about this that I thought were cool. Over 46 million Americans now use cryptocurrency, reducing dependence on fiat money. Private homeschooling has increased by 56% since the government shut down in 2020.
And rising. Yeah.
As parents seek alternative to state-run education. Decentralized finance, DeFi, transactions exceeded 200 billion in 2022, showing a shift away from traditional banking and even Bitcoin. And private land ownership grew by 12% in the last decade, reflecting a movement towards sovereignty. 75% of small businesses prefer fewer government regulations, indicating a desire for freer markets. And so the ways to implement this: embrace those decentralized technologies, use cryptocurrency, encrypt your communications to ensure privacy, and implement blockchain technologies in your communities for self-governance. Strengthen local and parallel economies, build financial independence through free market networks, expand private education and knowledge sharing, promote homeschooling, alternative learning, online learning, self-reliance, resist state expansion at every level, no matter what. Use nullification, civil disobedience, and economic resilience. Economic resistance. Develop secure and private infrastructure. Control land, energy, food, and security outside of government reach. And one of the things that's near and dear to Mike's heart: foster global decentralized networks. Connect with like-minded free communities worldwide. What jumps out to you there, Mike?
Obviously, the last one. I think the end game is we're going to have decentralized communities, townships, unifying on a global scale. Because then we have the advantages that even the nation states don't have. I think that's absolutely correct. That's really kind of the end game. And one thing I want to mention is all these things are of course valuable and necessary to pursue. Everything on your list, as usual, is worth pursuing. But I don't think it's too early to mention, even though we're finishing up. This is another kind of thing I was thinking about when we link together liberated townships across the world. Conceivably, we can kind of build towards that by comparing notes and telling each other's stories, like telling our stories to share with other people across the world who are trying to liberate their local townships, and they're trying to nullify their larger governing bodies. I think even just documenting, like whether it's telling the story literally by typing it out in print form and saving it as a Microsoft Word document, or however you want to do that, but saving that as almost like a journal of liberation. Like, I think there's a story to be told for every local liberation effort that there is happening across the world right now, and I hope to foster that to the point where people could write stories about liberating, like the liberation of fill in the blank here, your town here, your township here, you're part of, a larger city here, a Wilshire district, Los Angeles, the liberation of, any sort of township level area. There's a story, the liberation of your township there that should be told. We should start documenting these stories so that we can always learn from each other best practices, and we can see which one of these many wonderful things you're listing on your list, which one panned out the best for your particular part of the world, your particular local community, in your local area, your township. It'd be great to document all of those things. So without getting too far off the rails or into a whole nother topic, because I'm sure we can talk about this more maybe on the X Spaces, but this is kind of a way to really bring home the success of anything you just mentioned on that list, like which worked out best. What are the best ways to achieve this? Any one of those ends, but particularly I like the parallel society component, parallel economy, parallel society. This is how the original dystopia of ancient Rome was defeated. Ultimately, was a better society rose up alongside it, a better economy rose up alongside it, while Rome, this giant unsustainable global dystopia, was crumbling and decaying from within. Largely a faith-based community, the early Christians created a parallel society that outlasted the decaying unsustainable global dystopia. And I will say, we are in something. We're in a period of history just like that right now, with effectively a second Roman Empire, a second old world order that is being, I think, erroneously labeled the New World Order. We can work around them and create a parallel society and a parallel economy that undermines and eventually replaces that global dystopia that we're in right now.
Chris points out you probably need a VPN firewall.
Yes.
And Krill Queen says we're doing a good job. Thank you.
That's great.
And Chris says this sounds like a Willy Wonka story. Free in his adventures. Agorist first. Excellent. All right. So I want to close with my 6 mistakes to avoid. This is what communities must not do. Number 1, and this should be a tattoo across, my fingers or something, but you cannot believe that the government will reform itself. The state expands and will continue to expand unless actively opposed.
Hear, hear.
Underestimating technological surveillance. Privacy measures must be a priority. Failing to build sustainable economic models. Free communities need to create their own wealth and need long-term financial independence. Neglecting the need for physical security and defense. Government retaliation is to be expected and inevitable in these situations. Another one that I don't think we talk about enough, but ignoring the importance of cultural and philosophical education. I think, Mike, you do a great job of bringing this to the conversation, but future generations must be taught the principles of liberty and understand the goal, and also understand the trials and tribulations that we've encountered in the past. And then lastly, but not least, expecting change will happen overnight. Decentralization is a process that requires strategic, long-term effort and the ability to come together as a community. Mike was so excited about closing this. He did another dramatic exit here. So let's see here. And Chris says, these would be great. You aren't a real libertarian questions. So yeah, but they all come from the same place, Chris. It's all, it's basically like my mad scientist scribblings all over the place. And so it's basically, you'll notice that the questions the themes will kind of bounce from one show to another. So Zach says, I can't wait for all of us to link up in St. Kitts and fly to Japan to start an agorist samurai community. That sounds like a lot of effort. That sounds, can we just like hang in Florida? That'd be closer for me. Casey says, great show, guys. I assume he's talking to me because I don't keep leaving and hanging up on everybody.
again, not my intention, but I'm going to look into the VPN thing because now, even though I'm plugged in by Ethernet, my own Wi-Fi kicked me out. There's no reason for that. Weird.
All right. Well, thank you, Terry, for doing all this.
Thank you for your patience, Terry, as always.
Township Liberation. You'll see us on Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow night, we've got You Aren't a Real Libertarian, 8 p.m. Eastern. And I am on Liberty Dad at 6:30 Eastern. So I'm doing back to back. So if you don't like me for 2 hours, you're really not going to like me for 3 hours. So, and here's Mike's contact. Follow him and buy his book, The Revival of Common Sense, The Case for Township Liberation. And Mike, great show as always. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, sir.
This was fun. And we'll catch you guys either tomorrow or next week. So appreciate y'all.
Take care, everybody.